What happens when the daughter of a king is adored one day and cast aside the next? For the first decade of her life, Princess Mary Tudor held a rare place of privilege. Born in 1516 to King Henry VIII and Catherine of Aragon, she was not just a royal child, she was the king's pride. Henry called her his pearl, and she was educated in Latin, Greek, music, and statecraft. She was bright, poised, and carefully groomed to be a queen in her own right, and for years she was England's only legitimate heir. But as time passed and no son was born to Catherine, Henry's anxiety over the Tudor succession deepened. After a failed pregnancy in 1518, the king began to believe God had cursed his marriage. He pointed to Leviticus 20:21, which said, "If a man shall take his brother's wife, they shall be childless." Although Mary was very much alive, Henry interpreted childless to mean sonless. So what happens when your royal title is taken, your mother cast aside, and you're forced to serve the child who replaced you? In 1533, Mary Tudor was 17 years old and still believed she would one day be Queen of England. She was the daughter of King Henry VIII and Queen Catherine of Aragon, raised in splendour, treated with respect, and taught to rule. She had every reason to believe her life would follow the path set out for her from birth. But her world fell apart. That same year, Henry declared that his marriage to Catherine had never been valid. He had secretly married Anne Boleyn, who was now pregnant with their child. The Pope refused to annul Henry's marriage to Catherine, and so Henry broke from the Catholic Church, establishing the Church of England with himself as its head. In doing so, he stripped both Catherine and Mary of their positions. On September 7, 1533, Queen Anne gave birth to a girl, Elizabeth. The disappointment was immense. Henry had expected a son. Still, he was hopeful for more children, and what followed was a cruel reshuffling of titles and loyalties. Mary was no longer recognised as a princess. Parliament passed an act declaring her illegitimate. She was referred to only as Lady Mary. Her mother's title was also downgraded. Catherine became the Dowager Princess of Wales, the title she would have had as the widow of Prince Arthur, Henry's older brother. Mary was devastated. She had lost not only her title and future, but her place in her father's heart. And worst of all, she was ordered to leave her household and serve in the nursery of Princess Elizabeth at Hatfield. The humiliation was unbearable. She refused, and at first she locked herself in a room and cried for days. She would not address Elizabeth as princess, though she did eventually call her sister, as she had with her half-brother Henry Fitzroy. But she made it clear this was out of a familial obligation, not loyalty to the crown Anne Boleyn had seized. Mary's hatred for Anne only grew. In her eyes, Anne was the root of her mother's misery and her own. She was the other woman who had destroyed the family. Yet it wasn't entirely fair. Anne tried on several occasions to reconcile, sending kind messages to Mary and offering friendship, but Mary rejected them all. She remained loyal to Catherine and the Catholic Church. To be friendly with Anne would have been a betrayal. As for Henry, he began to see Mary as an obstacle. The once beloved daughter was now a political inconvenience, but he didn't move against her straight away. That came later. By 1535, Mary's status had deteriorated further. Her health declined, many believe from stress. She had no official role and was watched closely. The court that once celebrated her now regarded her as dangerous. But she refused to yield. She would not call Anne queen, and she would not deny her mother's marriage, and she would not accept her illegitimacy. Mary's defiance put her at risk. But what happens when the king's patience runs out? In the next chapter, betrayal, blood, and a brutal rise to power that reshaped the Tudor court. Anne Boleyn is dead, but her shadow still haunts the living. On May the 19th, 1536, Anne Boleyn was executed at the Tower of London, charged with adultery, incest, and treason. she was beheaded after a short trial and a swift fall from grace. Her marriage to Henry VIII was declared null, and their daughter Elizabeth was stripped of her place in the line of succession, just as Mary had been 3 years earlier. Mary might have felt vindicated. Her greatest enemy was gone, but the damage Anne had helped set in motion could not be undone. Mary remained illegitimate in the eyes of the law, and her mother, Catherine, had died just months before, in January 1536. The two women she loved and hated most were now both gone. Henry wasted no time. Just days after Anne's death, he married Jane Seymour. Unlike Anne, Jane was gentle, compliant, and devoutly Catholic, qualities Henry believed would help restore peace. Jane encouraged Henry to reconcile with Mary, but it came with a price: submission. If Mary wanted to regain favour, she had to sign a document acknowledging her illegitimacy and recognising Henry as head of the church. It broke her spirit. She resisted for weeks, even as pressure from her allies mounted. Finally, exhausted and alone, Mary signed. She wrote her father a letter begging for his forgiveness, calling herself his most humble and obedient daughter. Henry accepted it. Mary was welcomed back to court, but she never forgot the cost. She had surrendered her beliefs, disowned her mother's marriage, and swallowed her pride, all for survival. Anne Boleyn's ghost lingered in more ways than one. Her daughter Elizabeth now shared Mary's fate, declared a bastard, legally insignificant, but in private the two girls began to force a quiet bond. With both mothers gone, they were no longer enemies. They had more in common than either cared to admit. They were daughters of a king, discarded for political gain. They lived under the same roof and at times, and by all accounts, managed to get along. It was a tentative peace, but a genuine one. Then came another blow. In July 1536, Henry Fitzroy, Henry's only acknowledged son, died suddenly at the age of 17. Now with no sons and both daughters officially illegitimate, Henry's hopes for a male heir were again at risk. It wasn't until October 1537 that Jane Seymour gave birth to Prince Edward. Henry was overjoyed. At last, a legitimate male heir. Tragically, Jane died days later, but she had done what Catherine and Anne had not, given the king a son he wanted. Still, for Mary and Elizabeth, this marked a turning point. They were no longer essential. They were tolerated, occasionally acknowledged, but pushed aside. Their bond with each other quietly endured, strengthened not by love, but by shared loss. So how did Mary navigate a court that had broken her, and how would her fragile peace with Elizabeth hold up when power returned to their family? In the next part, the Tudor siblings face a new world, shaped by religion, rivalry, and fate. 3 children of one king. Only one would wear the crown, but none would escape the cost of the crown. When Prince Edward was born in 1537, Henry VIII finally had what he longed for, a legitimate male heir. The boy's birth was celebrated across the kingdom. Church bells rang, fires were lit, and prayers were offered in thanks. At just 9 days old, Edward was named Duke of Cornwall and declared Prince of Wales. His future as king was sealed. For Mary and Elizabeth, the shift was immediate. They were now firmly sidelined. Edward was the centre of attention, but the sisters were not bitter toward their younger brother. In fact, by all accounts, they loved him. Raised apart but often brought together for formal occasions, the 3 half-siblings shared a bond that surprised many. There's no record of resentment between them, only affection. Still, the political landscape had undergone significant changes. Mary remained in favour after her submission to her father, and Elizabeth was tolerated as a quiet presence, but neither had any real power. They were living reminders of Henry's chaotic marriages, and neither was expected to rule. In 1544, Henry passed his final act of succession. It confirmed Edward as heir, but crucially restored Mary and Elizabeth to the line after Edward, and any heirs he might have. It didn't reverse their illegitimacy, but it did offer a lifeline. If Edward dies childless, the crown would pass first to Mary and then to Elizabeth. 3 years later, in 1547, King Henry VIII died. Edward was just 9 years old. He became King Edward VI, a Protestant boy king in a country still divided by faith. The country was not ruled by Edward alone. A regency council dominated by Protestant nobles governed in his name. His uncle Edward Seymour, Duke of Somerset, became Lord Protector. Under his rule, the Reformation gained momentum. Churches were stripped of their images, the Latin Mass was replaced, and the Book of Common Prayer became the law. This deeply troubled Mary. She had never wavered in her Catholic faith. As Edward pushed for more reform, Mary pushed back. She refused to convert. Their once warm sibling relationship turned cold. Edward saw her as stubborn and dangerous. Mary saw him as misled and manipulated. In one famous confrontation, he accused her of defying God, and she calmly replied that she would obey her conscience, not a child. Elizabeth, meanwhile, walked a careful line. She was raised Protestant, but she understood how quickly tides turned at court. She kept her distance from controversy and watched quietly as her brother's health began to fail. By 1553, Edward was dying. Aged only 15, he faced the terrifying prospect of leaving no heir and a Catholic sister next in line. Desperate to keep England Protestant, Edward and his advisors devised a plan. They would pass over both Mary and Elizabeth and place Lady Jane Grey, a Protestant cousin, on the throne. It was a bold move and a dangerous one. Mary had waited her whole life to reclaim her crown, but now her brother's final act threatened to take it from her once more. In the next part, rebellion brews. The fight for the throne begins. She had no army, no husband, and no clear allies, but Mary Tudor had one thing they didn't: legitimacy. When King Edward VI died on July 6, 1553, few outside the court knew it. The death of 15-year-old king was kept secret. At the same time, the Duke of Northumberland, Edward's chief minister, moved to enforce the devise for the succession, a plan that bypassed both of Edward's half-sisters in favour of their Protestant cousin, Lady Jane Grey. Jane was proclaimed queen on July 10th. She was 16, terrified and politically trapped. She had not asked for the crown, it had been forced upon her, but the plan unravelled almost immediately. Mary Tudor, now 37, was not going quietly. When she learned of Edward's death and Jane's proclamation, she rode to her estates in East Anglia. There she gathered support not only from Catholic loyalists, but also from nobles, commoners, and many who believed she was the rightful heir. Mary's claim rested on solid ground. She had been named in her father's act of succession, and the people knew her. She had Tudor blood and the backing of powerful families, including many who were weary of Northumberland's influence. And in less than 10 days, support for Jane collapsed. On July the 19th, just 9 days after Jane's brief reign began, Mary was declared queen by the Privy Council in London. The people rejoiced, bells rang, and crowds celebrated. Mary had done what many believed impossible, a woman who had claimed the English throne by right. However, Mary's victory came at a cost. She had to decide Jane's fate. The young girl had not conspired against her. She was a pawn in the game. So Mary imprisoned Jane in the Tower of London, but did not order her execution yet. Her coronation on October 1st, 1553, was a dazzling Catholic ceremony. It marked the first time a woman had been crowned queen regnant in England's history. But Mary knew her reign would be difficult. She had no husband, no heir, and a kingdom divided by religion. She moved quickly. Her priority was restoring the Catholic faith. She repealed Protestant laws passed under Edward, reinstated the Latin Mass, and reconnected with Rome. She also had Parliament declare that her mother's marriage to Henry had been lawful. It officially restored her legitimacy, but it also cast doubt on Elizabeth's position. Mary considered removing Elizabeth from the line of succession, but she hesitated. Many councillors warned her that any such move would create more unrest. And besides, she hoped to produce a Catholic heir, and make the issue irrelevant. The challenge now was choosing a husband. Her council wanted her to marry an English noble, but Mary had other ideas. She favoured Philip of Spain, son of Charles V and heir to the mighty Habsburg Empire. The match promised strength and support from Europe, but to the English people, it sparked fear of foreign control. Opposition to the match grew rapidly, and soon it would boil over into open rebellion. Mary had seized the crown, but could she hold on to it? In the next part, betrayal brews, Jane's fate is sealed, and Elizabeth's life hangs in the balance. Elizabeth was the sister whom Mary once protected. Now she was the woman many wanted on the throne. In early 1554, Queen Mary's unpopular plan to marry Philip of Spain lit a fuse that had long been smouldering. The fear that England would become a pawn in Spanish politics enraged many, especially Protestants, who saw Philip as a symbol of foreign and Catholic domination. The result was Wyatt's rebellion. Led by Sir Thomas Wyatt, the rebellion aimed to stop the Spanish marriage and place Elizabeth, Mary's Protestant half-sister, on the throne. Whether Elizabeth was involved is still a matter of debate. What matters is this: the rebels used her name, and that made her dangerous. The uprising was swiftly crushed, but for Mary the damage was done. Her sister's popularity, her religion, and her bloodline made her a threat. Elizabeth was arrested, sent to the Tower of London, the same path Anne Boleyn had walked 20 years earlier. Elizabeth was terrified. She begged to write to Mary directly, and in her carefully worded letter, she pleaded ignorance, claimed loyalty, and even scored the blank space beneath her signature to prevent others from adding words after she had sealed it. It was a clever move, and perhaps one that saved her life. Mary hesitated. She didn't want to execute her sister, but her counsellors, especially the Imperial Ambassador Simon Renard, pushed hard. They warned that as long as Elizabeth lived, Mary's crown was at risk. Eventually, Elizabeth was moved from the Tower to house arrest at Woodstock. Mary was unwilling to spill Tudor blood unless necessary, but her trust in her sister had been broken. At the same time, Mary's marriage to Philip went ahead. The wedding took place in July 1554. It was a political alliance, not a love match. Philip was courteous but distant, and the English public remained uneasy. Mary, however, believed she was fulfilling God's will. She hoped the union would bring England back into the Catholic fold and give her the child she so desperately needed. By 1555, Mary believed she was pregnant. Celebrations began. A nursery was prepared. Prayers were said, but no baby came. What followed was heartbreak and humiliation. Mary had suffered a false pregnancy, and worse still, she would never carry a child. With no heir, the issue of succession returned louder than ever. Mary's health declined, her council grew restless, Philip spent more and more time abroad, and Elizabeth waited, quietly and cautiously. In her final year, Mary faced mounting pressure to name a successor. She never formally named Elizabeth, but accepted what the law demanded. The 1544 Act of Succession still stood, and Elizabeth would inherit the crown. Mary died on November 17, 1558. She was 42, and Elizabeth, at the age of 25, became Queen of England. She had survived suspicion, arrest, and near execution. She had watched her sister rule and fail, and now the Protestant princess was queen. The future of England rested on her shoulders. Mary Tudor has been reduced to a nickname, Bloody Mary, but her story is so much more than burnings and bloodshed. She was a girl adored, then abandoned, a daughter loyal to her mother, a sister navigating survival, and a queen carving a path no woman had walked before her. Misunderstood, maligned, and often misrepresented, her legacy deserves more than a headline. Want to keep exploring the untold sides of Tudor women? And subscribe to History Roadshow for more history that digs deeper, and comment below if you think Mary truly hated Elizabeth or saved her, because behind every legend is a truth worth uncovering.